Hello and welcome to the Little Knowledge Podcast, where this time we're talking about a real big beast in South Wales. Once owners of more land in Glamorgan than anyone else, we have the Mansell family and Talbot family of Margam Abbey, Park, Castle. The name changed a lot. They were there a long time. My name is Paul Busby, and with me as ever is Goff Morgan. Hello, Goff.
Yes. Hello. Hello, everybody. Greetings to you.
How are you, Goff, first of all?
I'm okay. A bit instead of a very full head of other stuff banging around in there. But apart from that, I am now, you'll be pleased to know, the proud owner of a bus pass.
Oh, well done. Well
The
done.
world is my yeah, but I've got there. The world is now. I am very, very happy with it. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's good.
I
I
have
have
an appalling picture on it. I look like it's someone has applied a soul sucking device to me, and I have just gone like that, gone on.
Oh, no one looks good in official photographs. It's why you need a portrait painter like all of these people we talk about.
Yes.
Bring out the inner you.
If Gainsborough had done my bus pass, how much nicer it would have been.
Gainsborough's bus passes. He missed out there, didn't he?
He missed a trick there, yeah.
Before we get started, first of all, thank you all for subscribing. We had a little bump, and if you haven't subscribed so far, please do so you don't miss any videos. If it's the first time you've stumbled across us, there are a whole series of videos that we've done over the last few months. In fact, we have done Whitsun Court and Stelvio, Fonmont Castle, the Gare House, St Donat's Castle, Llanfihangel Court, St Julian's House, Pontypool Park, Llanwern House, the Hendra, Llanarth Court, Clither Park, Kevin Mabley, Raglan Castle, Piercefield, Llanrumney, Malpas Court, and Troy. The things you do during lockdown, Goff.
I know. Things you do to keep your hands busy. Yeah, amazing.
But we've had a bit of engagement recently, haven't we?
Oh, yes, we've had a lovely lot of help from people. A question was sent to us on the channel about if we knew where the location of the old St. Julian's House gate posts were. And I put up a query on our site and a number of sites we post to, particularly the Newport Local History page on Facebook. And our friend Richard Frame, God bless him, man of parts in Newport, actually has a picture of them in situ, which he's put up for us. So if you go to Facebook page, you click on the Facebook at the top of the bar here, you can actually find a link. It'll take you to show you what the gate posts are and where they currently stand. So thank you very much, Mr. Frame. You're wonderful.
Yeah, I've got to point out, though, that if you contact us, I mean, Goff does all the Facebook, quite frankly, all Facebook and YouTube comments. You're usually chatting to Goff. I usually answer emails, telegrams, and carrier pigeons. So that's which one of us has the bus pass, Goff?
Yeah, but you also will do the things I have completely no answer to. So I don't know. I'll ask Paul. I don't
minor matter.
I write that, you'll see.
But one thing on the Facebook page, which was brilliant. Our last episode was on, what was a double header, wasn't it? Whitsun Court, Whitsun Court and Stelvio House. Well, one man put on the Facebook page, he was a fireman at the time that wonderful frontage of C.H. Bailey burned in Mill Parade. So if I show you the wonderful photo, look at that. This is what Nick Henderson.
Yes, thank you, Nick.
Look at that, my goodness.
Oh, incredible, isn't it? It was really nice because a couple of I think I can't remember the gentleman's name who replied to it as well, but he was another fireman who was actually there attending the scene of the fire as well, which was it's really nice to get that sort of feedback from people, that engagement from people.
Well, it's history right there.
If you look at it in the picture he showed, is that sort of very grey, flat-fronted bit of the right down in the corner there.
Yeah, the wall here is still there, isn't it? That we showed, but everything else, and of course the garage is here. But
the garages, that's the only bits that are left.
Oh, end of an era, but it does happen, I guess. Right, Margham, Goff. Let us have a crack at Margham.
Okay.
Now, 2 miles east of Port Talbot. You need to do Margham to understand the rest of South Wales. So this is a big jigsaw piece to go in our jigsaw of all these homes and houses.
Are you going to take down this share screen, old fluff, before we go?
Oh, I will do, except I'm going to go straight on to another one.
Oh, right.
So, so don't worry. Yes, I'm not going to talk about Margam among the ruins and
I was gonna say.
smoulders of C.H. Bailey. That'll be very tactless. No, I'm going to start off actually with we talk about sites, Goff. We
Yeah.
talk about the site. Why do they build there? And you've pointed out many times to me they're building again at the foot of a hill fort, and there's got to be something to do with the site. Well, the site where Margham is has bronze work, ironwork, Iron Age items found there, Roman finds, Celtic occupation. So it was clearly an extraordinarily old site anyway. And this is, as I said, 2 miles east of Port Talbot. And they found old crosses and all sorts. I mean, look at this.
Oh, good Lord.
Showing early Christianity, Celtic Christianity.
Yeah. Oh, blimey.
So the site is already a rather important. There is a ruin on the hill, okay? It's called the Chapel of St. Mary on the Hill, and it overlooks Margam Abbey. And there's the ruin. And the idea was, if you were a monk who had to look after sheep, rather than go all the way down the hill to go to services at the abbey itself, you would just stay on the hill and have your service here. But the view you would have from here down on the abbey would have been something like this. This is Margam Abbey.
Yeah.
So this is the main body of the church here, the nave. This little thing here, if you can see, is a constant in our talk today. This is the chapter house.
Oh, right.
It was built in 12...
all the monks gather in sort of for discussions and debates about the running of the abbey, isn't it?
Absolutely right. It's a meeting place. It was built in 1200. The rest of the abbey was formed in 1147, Margam Abbey, Cistercian, by Robert Earl of Gloucester. And it was a very holy place. It was one of the greatest and richest abbeys in Wales. At one point, the abbey itself owned 50,000 acres. So this is a vast enterprise. And I'm sure a very holy enterprise, but not always. We have to go to the reign of terror of Abbot Gilbert between 1203 and 1213, where we're told by Gerald of Wales that Abbot Gilbert of Margam Abbey was an aggressive land grabber. He imprisoned his own brethren. They razed the castle to the ground, dismantled the local church, and ejected the parishioners. You can tell it wasn't going terribly well when one of the monks converted to the Jewish faith.
It's really, he'd really had enough of it by that point, hadn't he? If this is Christianity, it's not for me. That's astonishing. Good Lord.
It's quite an achievement. But it says that Abbot Gilbert was punished by being kicked out of his post and with epilepsy. It makes it sound as if they strapped him in a chair and gave him epilepsy as a punishment.
It's God having enough of him.
But there were bad times as well. I mean, during the time when harvests were bad and just after the Owen Glendower rebellion, I mean, there were tough times. But on the whole, it was a very rich abbey.
Well, but they were temporal lords of the manor. They weren't ecclesiastics in the way we think of them. We have a very, very... the idea of a church and state being very, very separated is a terribly new thing. You know, basically, if you were an abbot of a vast estate like this, you had all the clout behind you of any feudal lord. Yeah. And you weren't afraid to use it and exercise your temporal powers as well as your spiritual. Yeah. So it's a different world.
Well, 50,000 acres is a lot of temporal, isn't it, really?
Tell it me.
Yeah. Anyway, I mean, you can Owen Glendower is one thing and you get through and it's all very rich, but there's one man, of course, that you can't beat when it comes to monasteries, and that's Henry VIII. And in 1536, the dissolution of the monasteries, the king makes a grab for the wealth of all of these monasteries, and Margham was no different. At this time, there were only about 9 monks still there, but there were a lot more lay brothers, so it was still a very large establishment. So he grabs it, and it's put up for sale, really. And the man who buys it is Sir Rice Mansel. Now, the Mansells were a French family, so over with the Conqueror sort of thing. And we know they pop up in Edward I's time in the Gower area of South Wales at Oxwich Castle. And Sir Rice Mansel saw an opportunity. And so he bought it In 1537, he paid in 4 installments. So there you go. In 4 handy installments, this abbey could be yours. About £2,500 he paid. And the idea was, as we've seen at Woburn Abbey and Llantarnam Abbey and all of these places, you buy an abbey to turn it into a new home.
Yes.
And so he moved the Mansell base from Oxwich in Gower to Margham. So let's have a little look at, these are the Mansell tombs at Margham. You don't want to be left there after dark, quite frankly. Great works of art. One of them is actually done by the same man, Maximilian Colt, who is responsible for Elizabeth I's tomb at Westminster Abbey. But this is Sir Rice.
Very, very good quality, aren't they? It's amazing how well they survived without being hacked around by the Civil War. Because a lot of the Puritans didn't like this sort of idolatry type thing and the imagery in churches. But
they were quite lucky in the Civil War, the Mansells, in that at the time a minor was in charge. So they didn't really have to the head of the house didn't have to make a decision of which side to join. So they kept their heads down because, it's a child really in charge of the estate. Very lucky indeed. So we got Sir Rice Mansel here. So he buys this and he creates the mansion. This lady's very important as well. This is his wife, Cicely, who happens to be lady in waiting to the Princess Mary, later Queen Mary. So, of course, during that time, in fact, this is another example, Goff, of a very minor gentry family doing awfully well out of the Tudors. Minor Welsh family, Tudors come along, gives them one heck of a bump up in society. It really does. And Sir Rice became a soldier, a sailor. He was Vice Admiral. Chamberlain of Chester suggests an honorary post. He's a long way from Chester, really, isn't he, Sir Rice Mansel? He did very well for himself. His son married a Somerset, daughter of the Earl of Worcester, future Dukes of Beaufort at Raglan Castle. So they're marrying very well. They're certainly rising in society, aren't they? And although they're buried actually in London, they nevertheless have this at Margham, this tomb, memorial tomb, rather than anything that holds a body. And there's quite a few of them, as you could see. Now it moves on. If we move on a little bit, you need a bump up in society. So if we go to the late 16th, early 17th century, this is a great portrait. This is Sir Thomas Mansell, who was one of the first baronets. So you've got a knight, and then you had a peer. There was nothing in the middle until James I wanted to make some money. So he created the baronet, which is essentially inherited knighthood, to go between knighthood and peerage, and you make a bob or two. And Thomas Mansell bought his baronetcy. He was third in precedence at the time, so he might have been the third man ever to be a baronet.
Oh, God, blimey.
So not bad. So here is Sir Thomas, and with his wife here, and the little flower is for Marigold or Mary, their daughter, who married a Stradlin of St. Bonnet's Castle. So it all links, doesn't it?
They're all doing the same sort of thing.
Absolutely.
I wonder what the flower was, because it's a very little vivid colour in what is a very sort of black and white picture, and there's that wonderful little orange glow in the bottom corner there.
Oh, yeah. And this lady, actually, Jane Pole, actually brought in huge amounts of land in Lincolnshire. She was a wealthy widow. She was a Mrs. Bussey, and Bussey was a name that enters the Mansell family through her. Huge lands in Lincolnshire. So it really puts Sir Thomas Mansell of Margham, another step up in the hierarchy. Yeah. He also had a bard. He shared a bard with the Morgans of Tredegar. His bard was Dafydd Benwyn. And he is known as a scholar and mirror of gentility, and the virtuous soul of Glamorgan was Sir Thomas Mansell. But Dafydd Benwyn...
Remember, their poets were paid to say that. Let's remember this.
Indeed. And I always knew about Dafydd Benwyn when he said of Miles Morgan of Tredegar, "Do not go to the sea. You are missed at home." And I thought, well, all right, he might be worried. He might have a presentiment, but he writes exactly the same for Sir Thomas Mansell, which has to be confirmation that he doesn't want his meal ticket straying too far from South Wales.
Yes, don't leave. I haven't got any other income.
That's exactly what it was, Goff.
there's a lovely little touch in this portrait, though, in the way that they're holding hands together. Isn't that quite sweet?
That is also that is also extremely rare. This is a
Yeah,
rare
I've
portrait of
seen
the
that.
period of a couple showing affection in a portrait.
Yeah.
So it's really nice, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's nice to see that.
And they both have a memorial at Margam Abbey as well. They were one of those marbles that we showed earlier on. But he was also shrewd, Sir Thomas Mansell, and a moneylender. So set up a little business. And
I thought that was prohibited by the church at the time.
Well, there's ways around these things, and Mansell's often found ways around these things. Now, the Mansells, as time rolled on, Sir Edward Mansell, who I don't have a portrait of, was a huge figure. He lived 1637 to 1706, and he was a big figure in the area, Sir Edward Mansell. Huge figure in the area. But very clever. Initially, he was against the Duke of Beaufort. He took the side of Morgan of Tredegar, and the Mansells and the Morgans married into each other's families, you see. Duke of Beaufort was the big enemy of the Mansells and the Morgans, whereby the Morgans continued that sort of not vindictive, but certain rivalry to the Dukes of Beaufort. The Mansells always were a bit more of a weather vane. They always bent a little bit.
Yeah.
So when the first Duke of Beaufort, who was president of the Lord Council of Wales, decided to go on a royal progress around Wales, he didn't go to Tredegar House, but he was welcomed at Margham. And he turned up there in 1684, and it's our first little sketch, our first little image of the house first built by Sir Rice Mansel. This is done by Thomas Dinley. Now, the problem with Thomas Dinley is he's on the move, okay? So they go all around Wales, and Dinley's making these sketches. So they're not very historically accurate. But it does show, quite intriguingly, we've got Margham here, but in front of Margham, they have pools for fishing.
Oh, yeah.
At the front of the house.
Well, I wonder if that's a hangover from the Abbey, because the Abbeys had fish ponds, didn't they?
They did indeed, the monks' fish ponds.
Yeah,
I don't
so
whether that was the original one, I don't know. It's an interesting thing to consider, isn't it?
There doesn't appear to be an awful lot left of the original Abbey, though, does there?
Oh, no, not an awful lot. You're quite right. But luckily, we have another image soon, which shows it in all its glory. But again, the accuracy of Dinley. What he does show here is the banqueting house, which the Mansells built. And Dinley said the Duke of Beaufort was very impressed by the banqueting house. It was terribly grand. It was inspired by classical Roman architecture, a Roman triumphal arch.
Oh, blimey.
And he says, oh, yes, there's marble, red marble, white marble, black. It's extremely... EM is everywhere for Edward Mansell. So it suggests that Sir Edward Mansell has improved the building quite considerably. And he was a very important person. As I said, close to the Morgans, but I like the fact that it said that Sir Edward Mansell shared in the convivial habits of the Welsh squirearchy. He liked to drink.
Yeah.
And William Morgan of Tredegar writes to his friend, Secretary of State Williamson, and he explains that, oh, I was dining with your friend Sir Edward Mansell at my house. It cost me half a dozen bottles from my cellar. So they were always getting drunk together, the Mansells and the Morgans. Yes. It's just the way it was. Luckily, in 1700, Thomas Smith, do you remember when we did Llanfihangel Court? There was this topographical painting from a bird's eye view.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And it's imaginative, isn't it? Because they couldn't get up that high. There is a wonderful one in 1700 for Margham.
Oh, gosh, yes.
So it's still Sir Edward Mansell. We're looking north here.
Yeah.
The pond has gone.
Oh, yes.
There's deer in the deer park. There's clearly a deer park now. The three hills have been altered slightly to put the house in the centre of it.
Yeah.
And this gatehouse here was said by the bards that if the gatehouse should ever fall, the family shall decay and die out.
Oh, yeah.
And here, of course, the banqueting house is still there.
So the banqueting house is entirely separate. You walk up that terraced garden to go to your banqueting house.
And this is a bowling green here. So it's like a procession to dinner, isn't it?
Yeah.
Interesting. The good thing about this, we think it's done by a man called Thomas Smith, is that he also did the other side. So we're looking north now, but very revealing. I mean, this looks later, doesn't it? And this looks higgledy-piggledy, probably Sir Rice Tudor Mansel.
Yeah.
And from the back, you really see that.
Oh, God, yes. That's a right jumble.
It's a jumble. It's a massive buildings, isn't it?
Yeah.
Banqueting
Now, that
house.
one, they could have got up on a hill and looked down, couldn't they? You can see how they got to that perspective. Couldn't have got it the other way.
Oh,
I
quite.
love the way they've captured the sunlight on the coast there.
That was deliberate, because what you have here is Kenfig. And Kenfig is quite a famous village, which was essentially taken over by sand dunes.
Oh, the dunes, yes, of course.
I think Time Team did a show on Kenfig, and the village had to be moved. Well, when this was painted, the Mansels had actually bought the manor of Kenfig from the Earl of Pembroke. So I think he's showing it off, because the sun only touches the new manor.
Yeah.
But if we look at the house itself, we can see the chapter house here.
Oh, of course, yes.
Which is sort of overgrown a little bit. Let's have a little closer look.
It's almost like the only little bit of the abbey left, the chapter house.
We've got a bit here that looks abbey-ish. And we got the chapter house, but there's not much. You're quite right. But look what they have. Glamorgan, we have yet, I think, Goff, to find a Monmouthshire place with this. But of course, all the Glamorgan properties we've looked at has been by the sea. And it's another watchtower.
Oh, yeah, yes. Interesting. Yeah.
It could be for...
And again, the family had a maritime connection, being admirals and goodness knows what else.
Oh, yeah, Vice Admiral of South Wales, the Mansels often were.
Checking up the ships coming back.
Do you know what? I don't think that these things are... I think it's more cynical. I don't think these things are to look out for pirates. I don't think they're necessarily to look out for safety. I think they're to look out for wrecks, because you were allowed to have the wreck if you were Lord of the Manor.
Oh, now that's very interesting.
And there's lots of stories of a wreck washes up nearby at Kenfig. And immediately the Mansels send their man out to claim it, only to find the Earl of Pembroke's man is there. And then the owner of the ship is there, and a huge brawl starts. So like you said, this is not genteel times. You fight for your rights here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's quite an intriguing little thing. We know also some of the rooms. There was a tiler's room, there was a clockmaker's room, and there was the cheese room, which I know is to do with dairy, but I'd like to think that it was a room made entirely of cheese at this old Margam house.
Yeah. Yes. Who needs the Amber Palace in the Kremlin? Let's just have the cheese room of Margham.
Now, it's all right being baronets, but you want a peerage. And eventually, a Mansell got a peerage. This is Thomas Mansell, who knew Swift, by the way. So he had connections.
Big fan of Swift.
And he was also the controller of the household to Queen Anne. So a powerful man. In fact, his wife, Martha Millington, writes about how scared she is about Sarah Churchill, the Duchess of Marlborough. Sarah Churchill, the Duchess of Marlborough, was really the sort of had a hold over Queen Anne. Watch The Favourite with Olivia Colman, and you will see. Rachel Weisz plays. And also, do you remember, Goff, where Sarah Churchill, the Duchess of Marlborough, has appeared in these podcasts? The oddest place? No, Pontypool Park, where she gave the gates because she was friends with the Hanburys.
That's right.
I tell you what, it all overlaps, I tell you. He was also friends with Robert Harley, who is a chap that clashed at the time with Sarah Churchill. So you can see how they have these issues, shall we say. Yeah. He became a Privy Councillor as well. First Baron Mansell, Privy Councillor. I mean, he's doing particularly well for himself. Extraordinarily powerful, really, in the long run. But have you got... And also, he was in charge of press gangs for South Wales, because he was Vice Admiral of South Wales as well. He boasts about hundreds of people he's merrily press ganged into His Majesty's Navy.
Oh, God.
He also liked the ladies. And this shows the 18th century very different from the 19th, because he has illegitimate children who he sets up in a house. His steward marries the lady involved, and he declares them as his natural children. In the 18th century, that's acceptable. In the 19th, it would be a family-crushing scandal, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They become very, very uptight in the 19th century.
Do you have your Jacobite bingo card, Goff?
Here we go.
Because the first Lord Mansell's son was a Jacobite, but not any old Jacobite. He was the Jacobite who was basically declared that he would be the leader of Glamorgan should they rise in the Jacobite cause. So we can add Margham to Kevin Mabley and all the others in South Wales that had Jacobite tendencies.
That's fascinating, isn't it?
So powerful man, but the problem comes when his Jacobite son dies before him. So the second Baron Mansell is his grandson, okay? His grandson, Thomas, and here's Thomas. This is a lovely painting by Ramsay. So we're in 1741, and their mother has just died. And they've decided, she remarried a guy called Blackwood from Charlton. So here is Lord Mansell with his step siblings.
Yeah.
So we have little John there, peering out mischievously. We have Shovel.
Shovel?
Named after a famous admiral who was that family. And we have little Mary.
Yeah.
Now, little Mary has impaired sight, which is why Ramsay is showing her why touch is so important with this bird.
Oh, I was wondering why she's touching a dead bird that her brother's just shot.
And it's not showing.
Not that I'm discovering she's got a thumb hole in the bullet hole.
It isn't, though, actually. You would have thought that, but it's actually the colour of the plumage of this particular bird because they didn't want to show blood because it would be unpleasant.
It does all the world look as if she's going, watch this, squishy, squishy. Oh, dear.
It does look like that, but I promise you she isn't.
Here.
And I have to say, my favourite member of the family is little John here. Look at him. He looks as if he's just fired his catapult at someone. But I hope they didn't mess with that gatehouse. Because if they've messed with the gatehouse, because there was a legend that, if, as I said, if the gatehouse falls, so does the family. Because all of a sudden, she dies, sadly, at the age of 24, as does the second Lord Mansell. He dies in 1743. He's succeeded by his uncle, who promptly dies in 1744.
Oh, good grief.
Which leaves them with just one remaining Mansell.
Yeah.
I mean, how quickly you fall if you don't have kids, right? And this Mansell has popped up in our St. Donat's Castle episode. It's Bussy Mansell. Bussy Mansell was a man who tried to get his hands on St. Donat's Castle after the death of the last Stradlin, the suspicious death of the last Stradlin, Goff, you might remember.
Yes.
Bussy Mansell is also known as the meanest man we will ever show on this podcast. I can't find a portrait of him. He probably wouldn't pay an artist to paint him.
Oh, good grief.
Bussy was terribly mean. He didn't like paying money at all, did Bussy Mansell. But of course, when he becomes the fourth Baron Mansell, he has to give up his seat in the House of Commons, of course, as an MP. And when he gives up his seat in the House of Commons, the man who replaces him is...
Hey! The most miserable man in South Wales. God love him.
Admiral Matthews of Llandaff and Pencoed. His fourth appearance on this podcast.
He's quite a feature, isn't he?
I knew when we started this that there would be Mansells and Herberts and Morgans and Somersets. I had no idea that Admiral Matthews would appear so often. Unbelievable.
It is, isn't it?
Anyway, Bussy dies with just a daughter in 1750. He has no heir. The Mansells have died out in 1750. It's the end of the Mansells of Margham. So the idea was that there was a male heir, his nephew, the son of his sister. Now, Goff, this has caused me to think more about her than anyone else in this podcast, really. This is Bussy's sister, okay?
Yeah.
And it's an extraordinary thing, this. All I found out from her originally was that she went mad and drove her husband, John Ivory Talbot of Laycock Abbey, to drink. And
Oh,
Laycock Abbey, the volunteers there have done a lot of research into various letters there. And this madness is a little bit more complicated.
oh,
And it
right.
sort I'm not saying it baffles modern science, but it is complicated. Let me give you an example from some of the letters, okay, and see if you can work out what's going on here. 1721. Her name's Martha, by the way, Martha Mansell.
Yeah.
She says he says she's a little out of order, 1721, and has the return of her giddiness and fainting again. 1724, she seems to improve. And then he writes, my poor wife relapsed and I feel worse than ever. Her fever returns. And then for 2 days, she's been quite delirious. Her groans would melt your hardest heart. And the convulsive motions of her hands and legs frighten the most resolved.
God.
It gets worse. It's now 10 weeks since her last relapse, but she has not taken notice of anything, never comes to speak to even me, doesn't recognize me, and not twice in a day knows me or those about her. She lies quiet, eats and drinks what is brought her, but is insensible. Her hands are convulsed, and the use of them lost. She has no sense. Her pulse is good, and though they say she has no consumption, and nor are her vitals touched. But she's entirely stupefied and senseless to the world. And this continues for 10 years.
Oh, my goodness.
A living nightmare this poor woman was living through.
Yeah.
And
Oh, gosh.
it's got to be a mental illness, hasn't it? A degenerative mental illness, surely.
It could be a degenerative illness, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, you wonder whether it's perhaps, yeah. I was wondering whether it might be sort of tumor or something, a brain tumor or something along those lines as well. A slow moving brain tumor.
In the end, he sort of puts her away.
It's definitely something neurological rather than psychological, isn't it?
There's a chance that he did take to drink, but you could hardly blame him with all the stress.
And also, you're at a time when you simply cannot understand or treat this. So the idea of watching someone who is clearly says, who would move the hardest heart, he's obviously not someone who's dispassionate about her. And he's watching someone who he cares for suffer terribly and can do nothing about it. No wonder he hit the bottle.
Yes, and the end came when she was about 45, and he writes on October the 17th, 1735. He also says that she got worse when her father died. Oh. So again, that suggests possibly the mental health plays into this. And he writes, my poor dear wife that was so unfortunate as to lose her senses by a fever 10.5 years ago, died of a mortification in 4 days, occasioned by pricking a tendon in her arm in bleeding.
Oh,
again, gosh. It's a really...
So bleeding is a medical procedure, wasn't it? It was done to attempt to sort of clear out bad blood and all sorts of things and relieve pressure on the brain. It was a complete useless medical treatment, really. So basically, she got an infection from that medical process. Probably not a very clean bloody incision.
No, maybe not. I mean, poor woman. I mean, she really did. As far as the whole idea was, though, by will, her second son, not the eldest son, her second son, who was a reverend who had no real interest in South Wales, took over the Margham estate. So you can imagine at this point, old Margham House is starting to deteriorate. When he died, his son took over, who we only have a marble of, and that's Thomas Mansell Talbot. So the Talbots are in charge of Margham now. So we're in the late 18th, early 19th century. He marries well. He goes on the grand tour. And when he comes back, he decides he doesn't really want to live at Margham. He builds Penrice Castle for himself. So he really a home there. And that's not always particularly popular. One man, a chap called Byng, writes, probably Mr. Talbot, a travelled gentleman, knows not of or esteems this treasure, but puts more store by some unpacked boxes of statues, as the maids call them, he has brought from Italy. This is one of the advantages of travel, to come home with a vamped Correggio and some shabby marbles, and then neglect the real antiquities and old pictures at your family seat.
Oh, that's interesting comment, isn't it?
1787. He
That's
did
a
buy a lot.
different view of the Grand Tour to what we tend to, a lot of people put out as being a great sort of adventure in culture and art.
Yeah, John
And then
Byng wasn't
you're
interested.
bringing all this stuff there and you're not paying any attention to what we should be looking after. That's quite interesting, isn't it?
He bought from a famous dealer called Gavin Hamilton. He bought a Rembrandt and a Raphael, but a whole load of forgeries as well. So you roll a dice when you're buying. Do you know what? One of unpacked boxes, says the maid. She's probably right, because one box of marbles was still unpacked in 1941.
Oh, good Lord.
And how did... Sorry, go on.
Getting quite Hurstian, isn't it? You know?
Oh, yes. And one person said, how dare he desert the noble seat of Margham for some desolate wilderness at Penrice? The truth is, the desolate wilderness is what he's looking for, because he doesn't like people particularly. He has no interest in public affairs. He does want to get out of the way. He does want to go to Penrice rather than stay at Margham. By the way, originally Penrice, but Penrice is how it ended up anglicised and continued. So what does Thomas Mansell Talbot actually do with Margam Park? Well, it does seem his plan was to build a massive mansion, to rebuild it, but you can't do that without getting rid of the old building. He says, next summer, by the time you come here, there'll be nothing left of it. Except, what a mass of buildings it was.
Yeah.
So he probably saw it as this higgle-piggledy mess.
But from the back view, it is.
Yes. The house was completely dismantled by 1793. There was nothing left. He kept some of the old abbey bits. And what he did was he built... first of all, he restored the nave of the abbey, which became the parish church. So it looked like that, okay?
Yeah.
With a bell tower there. And he turned it into that. So it's far more Celtic. It's an interesting choice.
Yeah.
Interesting choice. But perhaps he's most famous for building this. The famous orangery at Margham. The longest orangery in the country.
Okay.
At 327 feet long. Because these days you get married in Margham Orangery. It's a massive function room. But in his days, it was full of citrus and other plants. The story goes that there were oranges sent for William and Mary, but they washed up as a wreck at Margham. And you know what happens to wrecks at Margham? Immediately, the Mansels send out their men to punch anyone who gets in the way.
Send down the man to shout dibs.
That's exactly what happened. And they got this sort of extraordinary thing. And he had deer in the park. He wanted to turn Margham into a pleasure grounds, I think, while he lived at Penrice Castle. That was the initial plan. Hopkins Llewellyn, the steward of the estate, was in charge of the building of this. And the man who designed it was Anthony Keck, who we last met when he designed most of Whitsun Court. Anthony Keck. So he also did the orangery at Margham. But my favourite here, because the name is pure Dickens, the man in charge of the labourers who had to build it was Snook the gardener.
Snook. Oh, bless him.
1799, the roof of the chapter house collapses. That's what we're told. So they're not really looking particularly after it at this point. And Thomas Mansell Talbot dies in 1813. And fortunately for us, his son does take an interest in South Wales. And here he is. We'll call him Kit to make him different. Christopher Rice Mansel Talbot took over. We're now fully into the 19th century. This was a man who had a first in maths at Oxford. And he said, I only did it to please my tutor, really. It seemed to please the man. He was involved in the railways. So
here we go.
He invested in docks, ironworks, chair of the South Wales Railway Company. He had huge investments in Great Western. He was on the board there. And he realized that there was actually coal and iron and things like that to exploit on the old Margham estate. So that's what he did. He did have limits, though, Goff. The first passenger train to reach Swansea in 1850, Kit said, to the people of South Wales, you must travel, 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 but not near Margam Park. He tried to make sure that the trains were as far away from Margam Park as they possibly could be. He also destroyed Margham village because he wanted to extend his park in 1841. So he moved a village, became a new village called Groes, and that was moved in 1976 when they built the M4 through it. So if you're a villager around here, you don't have much luck, do you?
You don't. It's a narrow little strip to muck about with, isn't it? Really, you've got not a lot between the sea and the hills, have you?
Oh, yeah, if the sand doesn't get
you, a rail line to go through, and a motorway to go through, and somewhere else to go through, you haven't got an awful lot of place to put it.
Not really. But Kit's main thing, of course, was to rebuild Margham, and Margham Castle is what he rebuilt. He built on a slightly different spot. So his orangery, Goff, went on the site of the old Margham house.
Oh,
so
right.
The orangery went on there. He kept a few things, such as the chapter house and the undercroft and the church and things like that. But he built his new, very Gothic-style mansion in the 1830s, finally finished, you could say, in 1841. It's a very different style.
Oh, gosh, yes, isn't it?
Margham Castle, it now became known. And the man who was the architect was Thomas Hopper. We last saw him when he worked on Llanover Court, or Llanover Hall, as it was called in our Llanarth video. And the interior is done by Edward Haycock, who did Clither. So the architects do...
See the Clither influence, can you?
They do overlap, don't they?
Yeah.
He also moved the banqueting house because it was in the way. And
that's a shame.
He knocked it down, but he kept the facade, which I'll save for later, and he stuffed it behind the orangery. It's the power, isn't it? You move buildings. He's of course the key is though they needed a new harbour at Aberavon to ship all of this coal and iron and stuff and copper. And so he invested in a new harbour, and the town grew up around it. And of course, it was called Port Talbot after him. So he's the Talbot from Port Talbot.
It's the Talbot of Port Talbot.
Yeah. Luckily, also, he had a relative at Laycock Abbey, Fox Talbot, who's famous with photography. He's got lots of good photos.
Of course, yes.
In the 1850s. This is a nice one. Showing the chapter house. And what's still around, albeit romantically being eaten by ivy.
By ivy.
At the time.
Did you say this was by Fox Talbot?
Fox Talbot did an awful... This isn't.
But
there are several done by Fox Talbot.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
Inside his new house, you've got this wonderful staircase, and the legs of this table actually part of the balusters of the old staircase at Margam House, Sir Rice Mansel's house.
Oh, gosh. That's cute, Christy.
But look at it. It's a grand mansion, isn't it, he's built?
Oh, yeah, he has.
I suppose Monmouthshire's answer to a Victorian mansion would have been the Hendra, wouldn't it? That's the one big Victorian rebuild we had in Monmouthshire.
What should I know, the Hendra?
We did a whole episode on it, Goff.
The Hendra?
Yeah. You remember Lord Llangattock and his Chamber of Horrors?
Of course. What am I thinking of?
You did say you had a lot on your mind today.
I'm good. We've just done so many.
By the way, I should point out, if you haven't watched the Hendra, it is more memorable than Goff is making out. Do go and watch that video.
I tend to remember the people rather than the buildings, to tell you the truth. I tend to forget, get mixed up with the buildings.
I know what you mean. But it's a grand old place, isn't it?
It's fantastic, isn't it? Oh, look at that ceiling.
And full of stuff that they've managed to get from various places. His children are quite interesting as well. There's a great shot here I like from the chapter house all the way leading to the new mansion, the Victorian Margham Castle. Yeah. So the old embraces the new, isn't it? It's a wonderful thing. So this Kit, he was yachting, hunting. He was actually at the opening of the Suez Canal on his yacht in 1869, so he got about a bit.
Yeah.
And he had children, which is good. He had children. I quite like his daughter Olive, who had a disability. Actually, she was disabled, but the money she got from her father, she invested it in local churches, and but she was a teetotaler, So she had a curious little quirk. So she is responsible for Talbot Street in my Steg, which was the only teetotal high street in Britain.
Oh, good gosh.
Until 2012, when an Indian restaurant was given a license to sell alcohol.
Good Lord, that's that's pretty long lasting, isn't it?
He also had a son and heir, looking lively.
Oh.
This is Theodore Talbot. Oh, by the way, this is the Greek here is an Aeschylus quote. I call for the sun who sees everything, from Prometheus. He's sunbathing.
Yeah.
But
It's quite a nice shot, actually.
It's quite nice. He's an interesting guy. He's about 16, 17 here. Because when he got older, all his children were interested in Anglo-Catholicism. And Theodore threw himself into it. And in Holborn in particular, he would go amongst the poorest areas trying to help out.
Oh, gosh.
But he was still gentry. And he headed off and he loved hunting and things like that. But he was a proponent. Have you ever played, Goff, the game of Bando?
I have not. No, I have not embraced the game of Bando. No.
Well, that is because you are a man of Gwent, and a very proud one. And Bando was a specifically Glamorgan game.
Oh, right.
In the 19th century, it was kind of like hockey, but with 30 each side and a lot rougher. And it seemed to be only played in Glamorgan.
Oh, gosh.
And let's see them play it. They play in Bando in Glamorgan.
Yeah.
They look like they might be time travelers from the 1970s with those moustaches, but there you go.
Right, yeah.
And a poem survives called The Margam Bando Boys.
Hey.
And its due praises I'll bestow, and all the world shall know that Margam valor shall keep its colour when Kenvig waters flow. Our master, Theodore, straight and tall, is foremost with the ball. He is, we know it, and must allow it, the fastest man of all. Let cricket players blame, and seek to slight our fame. Their bat and wicket can never lick it, this ancient manly game. And it must have continued for a fair bit in Glamorgan. I'm told it's still an Easter tradition in Glamorgan to this day.
Oh,
I've heard of it. But look at the volunteer corps. This is the first Glamorgan Rifle Volunteers in 1875. Forever they've got here. And look what their symbol is.
The Bando
sticks.
Yeah. Oh, well, then interesting.
If you're watching this and you're from Glamorgan, please support Bando. I think it's...
Bando should be introduced. It needs television coverage and a bit of investment. That's what it needs.
Yes, Sky.
Bando to the masses.
You think Sky could get better subscriptions if they had live Bando playing in Glamorgan?
I'd watch.
Theodore unfortunately got very ill. He had a hunting accident in 1876. His doctor said, after a long layoff, now you can go back hunting. He hurt his spine again, and he slipped away at the age of 38 before his dad.
Oh, gosh, it's no.
His tomb at Margham is very impressive.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
It looks like it should be classical or medieval, and yet he has the Victorian sideburns.
Yeah.
His dad continued as an MP forever. 60 years. He was the father of the House of Commons for a long time in the 19th century, but it was said that he only spoke 3 times. And I've got here what he spoke about, actually. What did he speak? He spoke 3 times in 60 years. On the Reform Bill, on the Waterford Waters Act, and to tell someone to close the window because of a draft. He turned down a peerage 3 times from Gladstone. And one of that is that Theodore didn't want to become an MP and he didn't want to lose the seat for the family. But also, if he was a peer, he wanted to have the old title, Lord Mansell, brought back. And that would have given him precedence over a lot of barons. And Gladstone didn't want that headache. So in the end, he did not become a lord. So he got the name as the richest man without a title in Britain.
Oh, gosh, it's interesting.
Because by now, his industrial might, he is now the largest landowner in Glamorgan.
Oh, gosh.
But of course, Theodore has died. And so it was when he died, and when Kit died in 1890, it was actually his daughter, Emily Charlotte Talbot, who took over. And I like to think that with Lord Tredegar for Monmouthshire and Miss Talbot, as she was known, for Port Talbot in particular, because she, created ports and railway systems. She is the woman who created Port Talbot.
Oh, right.
She also created churches, a St. Theodore's Church for her late brother.
Yeah.
She was estimated wealth of 6 to 8 million. So that's
Oh,
a massive
blimey.
wealth. She is the richest lady without a title in the country, but she has that Lord Tredegar touch of that time in the Edwardian era. I'll give an example about this, Goff. There was a colliery that wasn't making any money, all right? And she couldn't bear to close it and put the men out of work. She said, think of the women, think of the children, think of the men. We'll keep it open. And she kept it open and financed it herself. It lost her £100,000. And she kept it
Oh,
open because she didn't want to make anyone redundant.
that's interesting, isn't it?
Miss Talbot. Now, it was during her time, which all kinds of intriguing things happened, but I believe, Goff, that there was a infamous murder in this period that you will tell us about.
Oh, yes, indeed. Yes. As you know, I like a good murder. I've inherited the fan from my dear late grandmother.
Famous for it.
Famous for it. Murder of the Gamekeeper basically took place in 1898 on the morning of Friday, June the 10th. The body of the gamekeeper was found. Here he is. Let me just, oh, hang on. I'll get on properly and share him for you. Scott the gamekeeper, Scott the murdered gamekeeper, as it is under the illustration at the time that we're in the pictures. It's a pretty straightforward case. Basically, there's no real question about who did it. There's not a great scheme to try and find the person. It's all pretty straight down the line, but it's intriguing in the way it demonstrates the way things are operating within the societies and things at the time. Basically, at this period, there was a miners' strike going on, and starvation was happening within the valleys, and poaching had gone through the roof. People were poaching all over the place. So Scott, who was the gamekeeper, went out on an evening with two gentlemen called Robert Kidd and a privately hired constable, which is interesting, a PC Hortin, to basically go through the woods and check, what was actually going on there. Now, while they're out there, they see a dark figure moving through the woods, and they split up to try and circle this figure. And they lose track of each other. They're running around in an area of woodlands and rough pasture, cum Philip, also turnip fields and various things. And so they're going around, and they lose sight of Scott completely. And then a gunshot rings out in the darkness. So the constable and Mr. Kidd, they try to track down where he is. They can't find him at all. They return back to his cottage to speak to his wife to see whether he'd return home independently. He hadn't. So the following morning, they go back up and they find his body in a gully near Blaen Malwg Farm, very badly disfigured about the face. He'd been shot in the face with a shotgun, gunshot wounds. Part of his jaw had actually disappeared, and there were other gunshot wounds on the body as well. The only clue they find is a grey cloth cap, which is recovered near the scene. So they begin their investigation. Now, the first thing they seem to do, an awful lot of things happened at the time. If you read out these investigations, they arrest the most likely candidate. So they pick on a guy called Henry Jones from Union Street in Maesteg. Remember the name Henry Jones.
Right.
This becomes significant. He's about 6 foot tall, light-coloured moustache, already known to the authorities because 2 years earlier he'd been caught setting rabbit snares on the Margham estate. Okay, so they grab him, and right, he did it. But this doesn't. All around the valleys there is gossip going on, because there is someone who is basically telling everybody that he did it, laughing at the press coverage for being inaccurate, saying, "No, it's rubbish. I didn't go this." So this starts to get around, obviously, and eventually they track down the guy who is lodging in Jones's house. But before this happens, the crime scene as usual, turns into a complete circus. It says the days after the discovery of the gamekeeper's body, large numbers of people flocked to the mountainside to see this crime scene. Or as the Post of the day put it, groups of humanity were coming to view the gully which had formed the agonizing deathbed of Scott. Blood spatters on an enclosure wall were particularly popular. On the Sunday after the death, it's estimated that some thousands visited the mountain, with the road from Port Talbot alive with traps, brakes, bicycles, and pedestrians.
Thousands.
So this is a real circus. A reporter from the Post goes up with a policeman at the time, seeing contingents of sightseers from my stag. And while they were there was a great ripple of excitement through the crowd because they'd arrested someone else. And this is a 32-year-old Joseph Lewis, who was a lodger with Harris at the time. A lodger with Jones. Now, he's a bit of a customer, Lewis. He had very hardworking, respectable parents in Carmarthenshire area, but was given to fits of rage. And even he reported it said to them that one day he would wash his hands in his father's blood. So, funnily enough, they were quite happy when he ran off and joined the 1st Battalion of the 41st Welsh Regiment. But he called all sorts of scenes over there, became a local disgrace, eventually turns back up, having actually deserted from the army, where he'd been a terror to his native place when he got home, saying that since I came home from abroad, when I'm in drink, I don't know what I'm doing, which is quite interesting because other reports of him he seems to be quite a pleasant, well-educated man, but when the booze is on him, you've had it. He turns into a complete monster. So it's all pretty straightforward from this. He's been telling everybody, including his landlady, that he'd killed him. He's making no, features about this. They take the down to Swansea for the court, and again, crowds turn up. A vast concourse of spectators assemble in the neighbourhood of the station to see people leave, and then they all turn up. They go to the court. 800 people gather outside the cottage of Scott's wife to see the funeral. So this is a real, circus of what happens. When he finally gets into the Swansea, again, large crowds throng the area from early in the morning, all keen to get into the public gallery. So this is just entertainment, really. But he's quite an odd character, Lewis. I mean, he's quite little. He's about 5'4". He's quite stocky. He's kind of being light of foot with a sharp movement. And he had a very cheery, happy-go-lucky expression on his face. Always being cheerful to people. But the reporters in the paper, he's sort of waving at him and making little gestures about how he thinks the evidence is going. It's very like that. This is man taking this absolutely seriously. But there are a mass of witnesses who have actually seen him coming down off the mountain and heard him report it. So even though the court does retire, the jurors retire, and what really should have been an open and shut case, for some reason, we have a little 12 Angry Men moment.
Right. Bit of Henry Fonda.
Yeah. When a small group of them, described as 5 men from Swansea, are adamant they're going to acquit him. Now, how there was any grounds to acquit Lewis, I have absolutely no idea whatsoever. But they stick it out, and eventually they send questions back to the court. They do all sorts of things. So they really do chew the fat over it, perhaps giving them their due. And eventually they all come back and they give a quote verdict on it. And of course, he is sentenced to death. This took place over a matter of days. Normally it takes a lot longer than this, but it took it literally a matter of days. So they take him off to Swansea prison to await his fate. Now, while there, he gets a sort of, he's treated very well. He said he ate heartily and put on flesh. So he gets a bit fatter while waiting to be executed. Not terribly good idea, I suppose. Bobby's eating far better than he does. In one of the letters he writes to family, he said, "It's like being in a hotel here. They treat me terribly nicely." So he doesn't seem quite connected to it. He takes to reading the Bible diligently because, say, he was quite educated. I don't think his writing is so hot because he gets chaplains to write letters for him at dictation because he doesn't reads fluently. He's singing hymns in both languages. His parents are Welsh speakers in Carmarthen, so he writes to them. And a crowd of people gather outside the church, evangelicals, who sing to him through the walls of the cell. It's
Very dramatic.
Peculiar. They turn up and they sing to them. A lot of the evangelical movements were very opposed to the death penalty, which is quite interesting thing to think about. This is 1898, and a lot of them were in opposition to it. So, and he actually sends one of the warders out to ask them, please, could they sing "Lead Kindly Light" for me? So they lead kindly light for him. Of course, when you get to the day of the execution, a letter had been sent to the Home Office to try a very tenuous attempt to try to prove insanity. But it didn't stick because basically he wasn't insane. He was just a little bit of an oddball, really. When the hangman and his son turn up, Billington, and the rumour goes around Swansea that he's turned up, and again crowds then follow him through the crowd. He's spending Billington, the hangman, he spends most of his time dodging the crowds. And then eventually he gets in. They test the apparatus which they've set up in the wheelhouse of the prison. This is the treadmill part of the prison. Testing it. They've heard of it as testing the apparatus. Basically what they do, they stick a weighted dummy on it and pull the lever. And of course, no, this is a point where public execution has ceased. It's gone behind the walls.
Right.
Prison. Up to this point, however, press had been allowed in. Now, on this occasion, for the first time ever, the press were kept out. Now, this was not going to, so we say, stop our worthies of the local press, who actually describes the review of how he climbed up onto a roof of a house. So this is in the paper at the time, and it says, at 7 o'clock, I entered the house in Glamorgan Terrace, and at the back found a very rickety ladder, which did little more than reach to the outhouse eaves. I arrived here, my first experience of slate climbing began. It was a risky ascent, but I knew that I could top of yonder eave could be reached. I should have an uninterrupted view of the procession as it passed from the main body of the prison into the wheelhouse. The method of slate climbing is to place your back on the roof and work yourself up with the palms of your hands. Well, that's very handy to know. This I did, and from the pitch of the outhouse gained the upper slope of the main roof. And up this, for another 20 feet, I progressed slowly, and at the top was rewarded by a clear and uninterrupted view of the proceedings within the walls. So he's actually climbed on top of the house of a nearby building to look in.
He's earning his wages.
He's doing it. While up there, he gives a very, he takes his time to give a little sketch of the actual jail so people could work it out. And he gives a minute description of the procession of this, full of that sort of great Victorian sentimentality that they like to do at this. He said, so basically they see them proceed across the courtyard. They enter into the wheelhouse, and then it says less than half a minute later, a heavy thud was heard. The penalty of the law had been paid, and Lewis had been swept into eternity. A few seconds later, the prison chaplain issued forth from the wheelhouse, from the chamber of death, into the bright sunshine without. The very contrast seemed to dazzle him. He stood for a moment silently with bowed head and walked slowly away across the courtyard of the prison. Now, after the execution, they hoist a black flag up on the front of the prison, and the crowd, of thousands of whom have been standing around since about 6 o'clock in the morning. When this happens, you don't necessarily get the response you'd expect, because up to now it's been a circus and it's been entertaining. There's been evangelical preachers there singing to them and preaching against the evils and using it as a way of spreading the gospels. But the moment the flag goes up, the entire crowd sigh. a huge sigh, a great sigh emanates from the crowd. Now that struck me as quite interesting because we tend to think of these things as being a bit more, callous, but it's not. There's a sort of, oh, happens. And isn't that interesting and intriguing?
Yeah.
But there's an interesting little twist to this. During his last days, he wrote a number of letters to family and to friends and to various people, giving what he said was his side of the story. And he claims that it was self-defense. He claimed that Scott had approached the court, come across him in the woods, and there was a standoff. Though Scott wasn't armed, he had a large cudgel. He says, "Don't come any closer, or I'll shoot you." Scott put his arms up, says, "You're not going to shoot me." And he went, "No, I won't. If you don't come any closer, I won't shoot you." At which point, Scott, he claims, charges at him and he fires. So he claiming it is self-defense. The only thing that's interesting about this is, do you remember Henry Jones of Union Street, my stag?
Yeah.
The family with whom he lodged. The Margham estate, poaching, and Scott and the people with him had beaten him unconscious.
Ah, that's interesting.
And then eventually regained consciousness. He was taken to Aberravon and fined for poaching. So the man he'd lived with had been previously beaten unconscious by the gamekeeper Scott. So that isn't connected really in any of these stories.
Interesting.
But it makes you, it does give perhaps a little bit of credence to Lewis's story.
Interesting.
That, he'd known someone that the gamekeeper was not necessarily a saint, shall we say, in this matter. So there we are.
Interesting.
The murder of Scott the gamekeeper.
Another sensation in South Wales, Goff.
Well, it's very odd to see how much, these things were entertainments in the way that they, aren't now. But also, be fair, I mean, since execution had been put out of public view, the 1860s, in the turn of the 19th century, really, only 4 executions had actually happened in Swansea jail.
Right.
We tend to think of hanging being much more common than it was. It wasn't really. This was an extraordinary, sensational event. And there we are.
Well,
as the crowd departed, they sang "Lead Kindly Light," which was the song he'd requested to be sung whilst he was in prison.
Right. And that was, and of course, that was the death and murder of Miss Talbot, as she called herself, gamekeeper.
Yeah.
Yeah, intriguing. Miss Talbot sadly never married, never had any children.
Yeah.
So when she died in 1918, it was the end of an era, really. A Captain Fletcher from Scotland took over. Interesting bit, this. He did the usual. I mean, he took over and he lived there and he put in a tennis court and various things like that. But then it was sold in 1941 against his will. So the trustees overpowered the owner, which is, trustees is something we'll chat about at some point in the future. So it was sold in 1941 to 42. There were troops there during World War II, even though the family still lived there at the same time. That might have been interesting.
Yeah.
And eventually it was bought by a man called David Evans Bevan, who was a brewer and a collier. And he bought this thing, and then after seeing the size of it, he thought, I can't live in that. And he ended up living in the old agent's house.
Oh, good Lord.
And what happens when you leave a place this size without anyone living in it?
Roof goes.
It gets bad, yeah. 1973, he sells it to the local council, and there are letters in the newspaper. What is happening to Margam Castle? It's in a terrible state. Well, they didn't know at the time the state was going to get a lot worse, because in 1977, I'm afraid this happened. Terrible fire at Margam Castle. They think a window broke and a piece of glass had actually laid on top of combustible items, and when the sun came in, it started a fire, and it tore through Margam Castle. The roof was gone, all the interior of the castle was destroyed,
Oh, good Lord.
leaving it just a shell. In fact,
Hmm.
we can have a little look at, oof.
Oh, gosh.
Remember how
Yeah.
it looked in the photos we saw earlier on?
Yeah, quite.
We've seen
Oh,
too many
yeah.
buildings that look like this in South Wales, haven't we, Gough?
Hmm.
Pretty bad. But in fairness to the local council, they have actually decided that restoration, no matter how long it takes, is the way to go for Margam Castle. And in fact, there are staff now working inside the castle again. So electricity was brought back into the castle, I think, in the 80s.
Yeah.
And the entrance hall and certain rooms are, and there's a roof on it. And so it's going to take a long time, but it's a great project. And if you look at the entrance hall now, looks grand.
Oh, yeah.
If you look up above, they've done a wonderful job on that, haven't they?
Oh, incredible, yeah.
So it's a work in progress,
Yeah.
Margam Castle, I think it's safe to say. Now, remember the banqueting house I told you that that was moved?
Yes.
Well, it was moved at the back of the orangery. So there's the front of it.
Yes.
They
Oh,
added,
yes.
allow me a stock photo. They added these statues and turned it into the Four Seasons Temple. The Four Seasons were never there originally.
Oh.
But it's fascinating because they actually put it on the back of the. It looks grand, doesn't it? But it's literally stuck on the back of the old gardener's cottage.
Oh.
There.
Bless him.
The gardener's cottage, by the way, is now one of these rental holiday homes sorts of thing. So you can rent your own private garden here, and you've got this banqueting facade, isn't it?
Yeah.
On the back of your cottage. And Margam continues to this day. There's the way it looks today. It could have been worse, couldn't it? They are trying to fight back.
Could have lost it completely, couldn't you?
But we'd like to finish with looking at our old friend, the Chapter House, which of course was built in 1200. And that's the one real survivor. And that's how it looked in the 1780s and 90s, just before the ceiling collapsed. So as you say, that's where the monks would go to meet. And there it is. It's still there in a way.
Yeah.
So it's still there, and there are still bits of the old, the old abbey.
Bit of the original building, I presume.
Yeah. Last year, by the way, Gough, a film was made. Wonderful hokum at Margam Castle, and it was called The Haunting of Margam Castle.
I have seen this on the shelves in Tesco. And I was going to say, have they made a film called The Haunting of Margam Castle based on the most haunted building in the United Kingdom?
Well, first of all, yes, that's Margam Castle. Most haunted building in the United Kingdom? Based on a true story? If I tell you that at one point in this film, the Witchfinder General Matthew Hopkins, which doesn't seem to have left East Anglia, turns up. It might be wonderful hokum, and it does have the wonderful Caroline Munro of Hammer Horror and The Spy Who Loved Me fame as a barmaid. That can't be bad. But based on a true story and the most haunted building in the UK,
yes.
We haven't seen it, but we're slightly skeptical.
A little bit more evidence for that myself.
Looks pretty though, doesn't it?
Oh, fantastic, isn't it? That's a lovely shot, that.
So it took a while, but we had to do Margam. Otherwise, future episodes wouldn't make any sense whatsoever.
Join up at all. Yeah.
The Mansells are an important part of our local history. So that's Margam, Gough.
I enjoyed that. I haven't. Again, you know of the places and you see them from the externals, but you don't necessarily realise how much, how significant they are, really.
They are. Well, Mansell's extremely important, and then the Talbots were Port Talbot, weren't they?
Well, yes, quite. Yeah.
If
there was a Talbot above the fireplace in the former smoking room at Tredegar House, if I recollect.
I don't remember that.
Now. He's gone now. He was above the fireplace where we waited to start the tours.
Well, the Mansells, rather than the Talbots, did intermarry into the Morgan family. Sir Edward Mansell had a slight problem when his daughter Martha married Thomas Morgan of Tredegar, who shortly after the marriage in the late 17th century, he ran off to Europe and wouldn't come back.
Okay.
So Sir Edward Mansell had to pull all the strings, pay all his gambling debts to get him back. So and another one of the daughters. So marriage and the Mansells didn't always work out.
No, They weren't so successful at the old, the marriage contract, marriage alliance things.
Not really. But thank you, Goff. And that brings to the end Margam. And I'm sure we'll be back at some time. So thank you all for listening. If you'd like to subscribe, we would appreciate it. And like the video, share the video, and we shall see you soon.
Yeah,
Thanks for watching.
bye.
Bye-bye.